I can rewrite the story.
Hey everyone, I'm the Canadian Lad, and today I watched Loki Season 2 Episode 5 at 0.25x speed and found some amazing hidden details and Easter eggs. Now I'm gonna explain scene by scene, as this episode was really one of the best we've seen from the MCU so far. So instead of just pointing out the hidden details, I'll also be explaining each and every scene. Now without wasting any of your time, let's begin the video. The episode picks up from right where episode 4 ended. Loki looks back and sees Sylvie, Mobius, Casey, and Obie are all gone. But then he finds himself stuck in a time loop, where he time slips into the future. And moments later, we see the future version playing out from the other perspective. And here the TVA starts to get spaghettified as well. And Loki time slips again, but this time to a branch timeline in 1962 in San Francisco, California. Now this tells us that Loki's time slipping is somewhat of a survival instinct. Although it seems like it happens randomly, but if you think about it, he only time slips when he sees there's no other option, or when things around him start to get spaghettified. Now we learned that Casey is actually Frank Morris in a branch timeline, who's a real-life person who escaped Alcatraz with 2 other inmates in 1962. Now this is the second time that the Loki series have taken real-life characters and put them in the MCU. Loki Season 1 did it by showing us Loki's D.B. Cooper, and now we learned that Casey is actually Frank Morris. Now an interesting Easter egg here is that the other 2 inmates are actually played by both directors of this episode, Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson. We then see Loki time slipping in front of a McDonald's, then right outside the store Mobius works at, and then the time theater at the TVA. I think the idea behind Loki time slipping into this room is because of what he thought about this room originally in Season 1.
For the record, this really does feel like a killing me kind of a room.
So now that Loki is kind of fearful of losing his life, or entire reality as we know it, he subconsciously time slips into this room. Cut to another branch timeline in 2012 in New York, where we find that Hunter B-15 is a doctor. This explains how out of all the TVA hunters, she was the only one who actually wanted to save timelines, because in her past life, saving lives is all she ever did. Loki then time slips into Mobius's timeline again, and this time his movements mimic the inflatable tubeman behind him. And notice Loki can't even see the tubeman, and yet his movements are synced with it. Meaning, whenever Loki time slips, his motion and gestures actually react to the surroundings of where he's time slipping into. And this could also mean that slowly Loki is learning to control his movements when time slipping. Now Mobius' store's name is Piranha Power Sports, and I like how there's a Beware of Piranha sign right by the door. Cut to another branch timeline in California, this time in 1994. Here we see that Obie is a writer and is trying to buy his own book to spread a good word of mouth. Now Obie lives in an abandoned place in the wilderness, and he has all these sticky notes on a board. But notice this particular note has a hidden detail that is foreshadowing the ending of this episode. Here, Obie has written down who, what, where, when, and why, and circled the word who. And we of course learn at the end of the episode the importance of the question who. It was never about why the TVA, when the TVA, or where the TVA. It's all about who created the TVA and who can control it. And it seems like the answer to that is Loki himself. Now, as soon as we get a wide shot of the place where Obie lives, this is the exact same room that we see inside the TVA. The curved shelves on both sides, the giant fans in the background all remain the same at the TVA as well. Loki then tells Obie everything, and he of course very easily believes in his story. In fact, Loki's story actually reminded Obie of his own book, The Sons of Yorin.
This reminds me of what happens in The Sons of Yorin.
What's that?
Just, my most popular book of all time. I'm sure I can find your copy somewhere around here.
And I think Obie might have written this book based on Odin's 2 sons, Loki and Thor, therefore the Sons of Yorin. And the basis I have for this theory is the official Instagram account of Thor that shared this video just before the release of this episode.
Only one of you can ascend to the throne, but both of you were born to be kings.
So Odin is probably telling the truth here. Although there's only one throne in Asgard, but both of his brothers were born to be king. One, the king of Asgard, and another, perhaps the king of all time? And notice the cover of the book has a similar color scheme as Miss Minutes does. So Obie might have a preference for the color orange, and that's why everything at the TVA has this color. We see a chalkboard in this room as well, and this could explain the chalkboard we've seen at the Citadel of He Who Remains. And the formulas and equations we see in both chalkboards are about having to live through time in a non-linear way. Obie then explains to Loki how his time slipping could be a good thing, as it's only taking him to the people he's looking for, and all he has to do is learn to control it rather than getting rid of it. So Loki tries his best to time slip at will, but he fails. And if you think about this scene, this is basically what Tom Hiddleston does every time we see him time slipping, and the VFX team just adds all this graphics here. Obie then tells Loki that if they manage to get the band back together, all of their temporal auras might allow Loki to time slip to the TVA just before Victor Timely was spaghettified. But one problem, they don't have a tempad, and Loki is still not able to control his time slipping. So Loki asks Obie to build a tempad, but Obie says without the knowledge of how it all works, it could take a lifetime for him to make a tempad. So Loki hands him over the TVA guidebook that Obie wrote himself, creating another paradox. Now Loki time slips again at this moment and goes straight back to Mobius. Now notice the house number says 1049, and in the comics, Earth 1049 was a reality constructed by Franklin Richards, the son of Reed Richards and Sue Storm. And I like how there's a bedsheet hanging out of the window like a rope, so Mobius' sons probably sneak out of their bedroom when he ain't looking. And his son Kevin has an action figure that looks like the Minutemen from TVA. Now while Loki was in the middle of a conversation with Mobius, Obie suddenly walks in through a time door, holding a very basic version of the tempad. Loki asks, "How did you make it so fast?" And Obie responds, well, it took 18 months for him to build it, meaning Obie time traveled to the past to where Loki and Mobius were having this conversation. Loki then convinces Mobius and Hunter B-15 to join him, and when all of them are together, Hunter B-15 asks if that's everyone or there's more to the team, and Loki says there's one more. So he goes on to pursue Sylvie to join him in his mission. Now notice when Sylvie was leaving McDonald's, she was carrying a bag and a drink, and just before Loki arrives, we see her meal get spaghettified, but she doesn't. So when she sees it's gone, she just assumes Loki must have taken it, without realizing that the reality she is living in is already falling apart. And when the camera pans towards Sylvie, we could no longer see her meal, but notice the VFX team made sure to add it on the side view mirrors where we could still see it getting spaghettified. Now after seeing Loki time slipping, Sylvie takes him to a bar for a drink, and we get an Easter egg for the character Zaniac, as the bar has an arcade machine based on the Brad Wolf film Zaniac. Now in the bar, Sylvie asks Loki, "Why do you want to save the TVA?" And Loki says he just wants his friends back. I like how the bartender wasn't paying attention to Loki at all, but as soon as Loki said it, the bartender gives him a look and kind of nods at him.
What do you want?
I want my friends back.
Now Sylvie is such a great but flawed character. She tells Loki that he's being selfish, but the delay she caused by messing with Loki's head could have destroyed the entire multiverse. If Loki hadn't learned to control his time slipping at the last second, everything would have been gone, and it all would have been Sylvie's fault for derailing Loki's plan to get the band back together. Now I'm not saying Sylvie is wrong here, because all her points are valid, and her experience with the TVA has been nothing but awful. And I like how initially Sylvie refused to help Loki, but as soon as she sees her reality falling apart, she realizes she is wrong and immediately goes back to Loki. And I want to thank the writers for doing this. Finally, Sylvie made a mistake and owned up to it. Finally, a female character realized her mistake and went back to a male character for help. There is nothing wrong here. In fact, in this brief moment, Sylvie had more character development than She-Hulk ever had in her entire series. I know I'm looking at the genders of the characters instead of just focusing on the characters, but still, with how Hollywood is dealing with female characters lately, where no female characters make mistakes, this seems like a gutsy move from the writers. They finally made Loki the hero in his own show. There is nothing wrong with it. Let the female character evolve from her mistakes and grow. Let her have the same character developments that a male character would. Don't just make her the hero with no groundwork. Loki then reaches for his drink, but it's gone, indicating what happened with Sylvie's meal earlier is exactly what happened with Loki's drink. But just like Sylvie, Loki also fails to realize that this particular timeline is falling apart. Cut to Obie's lab, where Frank asks Obie if the Tempet can get him inside a bank vault. And this is so accurate with his real-life character, because Frank Morris got involved with crime by the time he was just a teenager. So it's understandable that he would ask to commit bigger crimes when given the opportunity. And it also makes sense that someone like Frank ended up being Casey at the TVA, because real-life Frank Morris reportedly had an IQ of 133, and Casey's one of the geniuses at the TVA. Now after Sylvie finally joins in, Loki says to Obie that all the pens are here. But notice Obie doesn't exactly understand what Loki is referring to here, until Loki says the mug, the coordinates, and that's when Obie realizes Loki's talking about the metaphor of all the pens in the mug.
We have all the pens, the mug, the coordinates.
Okay.
The reason it took Obie some time to get on the same page with Loki here is because for Loki it's all happening in a day, but for Obie almost 2 years have passed since he said it. Man, I love the subtle details in the writings here. Obie then goes for the tempad but finds it's gone, and slowly all of them disintegrate into strands of matter. Now let me point out a clever detail from the writer's perspective here. The tempad being gone off screen was actually foreshadowed twice in this episode itself. First, with Sylvie's meal going missing and then Loki's drink at the bar. With these two scenes, we as an audience learned what's going on. So when Obie couldn't find the tempad he built, we immediately understood it got spaghettified. And that's clever writing, where you don't have to explain everything with dialogues. Because if you plant the seeds and tell the audience will then figure it out themselves when they see a tree. You don't have to point out the tree. And man, the Infinity War vibes that I got in this episode was just epic. Anyway, Loki then learns to control his time slipping and goes back to the moment where Victor Timely was about to gear up. And notice before Loki learned to control his time slipping, he would see another version of himself already there. But once he learned to control it, he now replaces that Loki instead of creating a new one. Shoutouts to my viewer Alejandro for catching this detail. And shoutouts to my regular viewer Chris who came up with this detail. The two children of Mobius have a character dynamic similar to Loki and Sylvie in the first half of season 1. One of the children steals, burns things, runs away, and doesn't follow the rules. And the other listens to Mobius. He chases the other kid, but he does things in exchange for something. And this is such a beautiful parallel between Loki and Sylvie and Mobius' sons. I think this episode is one of the best that Marvel has ever produced. I literally clapped at the end of this episode, it was that good. I mean, we finally saw how the other branches are dying, and we now care about them. Till now, it was all talk, no visuals. But now that we've seen the visuals, it makes such a big difference. And boy, the way they executed the scene in the record store, it was such a well done scene. And of course, Loki saying this:
I can rewrite the story.
Finally, a Marvel lead is actually taking the lead in his own story, instead of getting sidelined by new characters. Credits to Eric Martin for such incredible writing. I mean, think about it. A god who valued no human lives is now trying to save his human friends. He even says, without them, where do I belong? A full circle completed. Ouroboros is simply the theme of Loki Season 2. Now please give me a thumbs up if you like this video, grab the subscribe button and turn notifications on. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram to get updates about my videos. Till then, I'm Kevin Hart and I'll see you lads in the next one.